and welcome to today's webinar on the topic of integrating data, how to make public sector standards for data stick. I'm Siobhan Benita, I'm a former UK civil servant, and I'm chairing this webinar on behalf of Global Government Forum, which is a publishing house that serves civil servants all around the world. And I'm delighted that we have our knowledge partner with us today, Coursera. Now, in terms of today's topic, good data management is crucial for the work of public servants and the delivery of efficient and effective public services. And during the coronavirus pandemic, we saw governments using data in unprecedented ways, either using, for example, payroll data to deliver income support schemes or health records to help identify people that needed particular support during national lockdowns. But none of this was without significant challenges. Even before the pandemic, governments were developing rules to enable data sharing, recognizing that historically, this hasn't been approached in a very strategic or a joined up way. So quite often in countries, different departments and agencies are using different standards for information collection and different systems to store the data that they hold. And quite often rules and procedures in those countries can prevent effective data sharing across organizations. So this webinar today is going to look at the lessons the existing barriers to data sharing are in government, how governments were able to overcome some of these during the pandemic, and what strategies different countries are developing to improve standards and facilitate better data sharing in the future. And in a moment, I'm going to introduce our fantastic panel. We're going to hear from our panel, but after they've spoken, this will also be an opportunity for you, the audience, to put your questions to our speakers. So whichever device you are using, there should be a Q&A function, a kind of icon on your screen. Please use that at any point from now on to message in your questions, and we'll get through as many of those as we can before the end of today's webinar. And if you've just joined us, just to repeat, if you would like to listen to this webinar in Spanish, please click on the interpretation button on your screen and you can select Spanish there. So now to our fantastic panel. First, we will hear from Sandra Serav, who is Data Policy Director at the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Communications in Estonia. Sandra leads the government's work on data reuse, as well as application of privacy-enhancing technologies. Sandra also brings private sector experience to her role, having spent time working at Bolt and Facebook previously. Then we'll hear from Mr. Faris Jafarov, who is Director of the E-Government Development Center of Azerbaijan, which is responsible for the digitalization of public services, coordination of digital government transformation, interoperability of government information systems, and delivery of digital public services via the e-government portal. Faris has a wealth of experience across numerous government agencies in Azerbaijan. Then we will hear from Alina Leon-Kozenko, who is Strategic Government Engagement Executive at Coursera, our knowledge partner. Alina currently supports the Global Government Partnerships team at Coursera. She advised more than 30 ministries across the world on best approaches to delivering a skills-first learning and has been involved in the launch of multiple programs focused on preparing citizens for the future of work. And then last, but by no means least, we will hear from Seth van Huland, who is Program Manager for the Semantic Interoperability Community in the Interoperable Europe Unit at the European Commission. With a wealth of experience on data governance issues, Seth leads work on developing solutions to help European public administrations perform seamless and meaningful cross-border and cross-domain data exchanges. So as I say, I'm sure you'll agree, we've got a fantastic panel here today. Please do use this opportunity to put your questions to them using that Q&A function. But without further ado, I'm going to invite Sandra to give us her opening remarks.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Greetings from Estonia. We're facing currently a heat wave, which is normally quite unexpected, but over the past 3 years or so, we've become quite used to it, hence my pinkish face. But thank you, everyone, for coming here today. And I'm really happy to have been invited and to share my experience from the Estonian government. And as you may or may not know, and most of you probably will, Estonia is one of the most advanced digital governments in the world. We launched our very first e-government service already back in the end of 1990s. And since 2001, we already had a bunch of government services being offered online, each from their own individual information system or a database. And we had to figure out how to make those databases speak to one another and how we can actually share the information between the databases. Because from very early on, we tried to function on, with the principle or within the principle of once only. I mean, it's still not there yet, and we're looking at this in several countries across the world. We're looking towards this in Europe, but we tried to implement this idea at the very early stage. And due to the fact that we did not have one grand database, and that we instead opted to have a distributed channel or exchange layer of databases, we had to figure out from very early on how we can make those databases talk to one another. And this X road, which is what we call the busiest highway in Estonia, because we don't really have highways in Estonia, is what connects hundreds and hundreds now, both public and private sector databases, because we do keep, the population registry keeps information about one's place of living. You have, of course, your medical records, you have your police records, your school records. So all of the data is situated or located in the database where it has the main owner. But if you need a request to access some of the data from another database, then this goes through X-Road. So for instance, we use internet voting in Estonia since 2005. If I use it online, I merely download the software. When I authenticate myself with my ID card, then there's a request made to various databases to see if I'm actually eligible to vote, what's my age, where I live. So they show me different types of people I can vote for. So this is so-called Digital Government 1 or e-Government 1 that we had in Estonia. And now, of course, I mean, we've gathered all this data, and there's more and more data from local governments, from our businesses, from each of the public sector units. And for the purpose of not obtaining the data in order to complete the transaction, but for instance, for the purpose of actually analyzing the data and make database decision-making, data-based politics in Estonia, now we've sort of run into some trouble. And maybe trouble is not the best word, but I think we're facing more and more obstacles because there is this data, but we don't know how to use it. I mean, of course, we have the GDPR. And when we're talking about personal data, you always have to have a legal basis for processing this data. But now we see that different databases still hold this very valuable data, and the local governments hold the very valuable data, and everything that is not open data, which is where we've sort of become to see that it's not that easy to access this data as we thought it would be. So we're looking at different options on how to really do get access to them. So for instance, I'm launching this national project plan for the PETs or privacy enhancing technologies. So we're working on finding a government partner. So everyone who's listening today and interested in this, you can reach out to me. But we're trying to figure out the government partner who could help us analyze which of the PETs could be the most suitable to use in the government for data processing. And for those of you who are not very familiar with PETs, basically, they enable you to analyze the data, such as encrypted data, without decrypting it. And then we're looking into more and more open data. And why it's become more crucial is because we see that when we have high quality data sets, then even private sector uses it. So we used to be at the very low level in the European use of open data in different types of charge. And now in recent years, we started focusing more on the open data, and we're now definitely in top 5 already. And we see that open data will have value of 445 million euros for Estonia by 2025. And we see first business models built solely on the use of open data, such as one solar panel company who, based on the data, open data they get from the building registry, analyzes where does it make most sense to actually place the solar panels. And so basically their business model is based on open data. And so this is for private sector. And of course, for public sector, there are numerous use cases. And when I mentioned Digital Government 1.0 before, and now we're looking at Digital Government 2.0, and something we're looking into here is proactive services or life event-based services, both for individuals as well as for businesses. So what it would mean that currently, if you have a baby, if you retire, you can start all of these processes online, and you will get all of your results online, and you can file all of your applications online. And it's not in a sense that you download a form and you upload it, but everything is information system based. And now Digital Government 2.0 would be that if you launch this live event, then everything else will be offered to you proactively. So let's say you retire or you become disabled. So the life event is not only something positive, it actually can be related to a negative aspect in your life. And then in these cases, especially, you don't want to start thinking about where could I apply for benefits, or how long does it take, and where do I get this information about what benefits are available to me. So these life event services would then launch a series of transactions that the government offers to you proactively, such as you became disabled. This is what you can count on that the government is going to offer you. Do you want to get these benefits? Or when you have a baby, then the government says, we're going to sign up your kid for the kindergarten. We're going to send the child benefits to mother's bank account, and all these sorts of things. And in order actually to pull these life event services and to make them happen effectively, we need to use data across government. And we need to use this data effectively. We need to analyze this data. We need to access this data. And it's becoming more and more difficult due to the reasons I mentioned earlier. And I would like to just keep going on, but I know my time is quite limited, so I hope you have a bunch of questions for me. But these were my brief introductory remarks. Moving towards Government 2.0 needs interoperability, needs data sharing, and most importantly, needs people to trust the services that they use.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sandra. What a brilliant way to start there, because I think you've raised lots of issues, as you said, that we can come back to in discussion and in the questions. But really interesting, because Estonia is known so much as kind of a front runner in all things digital and data. So really interesting to hear that even though you've done all of that groundwork, you're now hitting some of these challenges around GDPR, around access and consent issues. Interesting to hear how you're moving now on these PETs, as you call them, and also more use of open data. And what you mentioned there very fleetingly at the end, I think will come up, the importance of trust. I think because there's a big issue around kind of trust between the citizen and how they want government to be using their data. So thank you so much for setting the scene for us. Faris, I'm coming over to you in Azerbaijan.
Thank you so much. I hope you see my screen, and I will do some presentation.
That's perfect. Thank you, Faris.
Actually, I would like to thank Sandra. She did a nice presentation. Actually, Azerbaijan and Estonia, we have a nice connection in terms of digital government. So we learn from each other and share our experiences. In 2013, we started with Estonian model of X-Road in Azerbaijan. Just 2020, we started to develop our own system of data exchange. But here in Azerbaijan or in America and anywhere, so still the government actually dealing with the same problem, issuing ID card, passport, providing public services to people, but in different way. But it's good that there are nice experiences in the world that we can actually get some experiences and a benchmark from different countries. And Estonia, one of the leading country in digital government. I would like to thank them that coming up with a lot of good knowledge and experience for other countries. Actually, in 2012, Azerbaijan understood that without like physical and fundamental public services, it's very difficult to build the digital government. The simplification of processes are very vital. That's why we created a one-stop shop model of public service delivery in Azerbaijan, which brought 12 ministries under one roof and providing services from the physical place. So this is a concept of ASAN. We call it Easy Service, Azerbaijan Service Assessment Network. And that actually helped us to simplify public services using this platform as a laboratory. So on a daily basis, we were dealing with different requests and complaints made by people. And we created a lot of platforms of getting feedbacks from people in order to analyze them and come up with new solutions. So far, we actually issued and provided around 50 million requests, and we have single address service with the same standards, mobile services, regular trainings for public officials, online queue system. We apply Kaizen, lean management, and we apply a lot of business oriented knowledge and experiences in our case, because otherwise we cannot optimize services. And we also apply project management PMI standards in our case, and created a special PMO office. And at the moment, we are in the transition of Agile, Scrum, and Kanban model of management. So basically, this is one of the picture of our one-stop shop. So far, we have provide 320 services, 11 public institutions and 30 private. So basically, imagine a center that people get inside, they can get their coffee, leaving their kids in the corner, buy their car, sell their house, get married, and all of these things are happening in one place, which is good for people. The customer satisfaction is a key performance indicator for us. And so far, we have 99% of satisfaction rate. We are looking for this 1% who made the complaint about us. So we are trying to actually develop those areas that they have a complaint. Actually, complaint is a gift given by citizens to the government agencies, where they can actually, based on that, they can develop the public services and simplify. This is our recent open center photos. It is quite big. It's like a shopping mall. Within the building, we also create the startup zone, which is we are closely working with startups to create GovTech solutions for the government, where actually we are lacking in terms of human resources in IT and other cybersecurity. Those startups actually coming with ideas and solutions in the area that we have challenges, and we actually make a public-private partnership with those startups. And we also have train and buses traveling around the country in order not to leave anyone behind. And we are providing public services through bus and train in different remote areas. Even in prison, we are providing services to prisoners. They're also citizens of the country. So trying both provide public services online and offline. So digital divide is a main challenge of all governments in the world. Whatever we do, still there will be some group of people that they are actually behind the technology and innovation developing in the country. So we have to keep opening such kind of one-stop shops that actually we can provide services to elderly people and to keep the inclusivity. So the main principles are leaving no one behind, diversity and inclusion, transparency and accountability. So basically, we are following SDGs as well. At the moment, out of 17, 10 SDGs are actually main targeted areas in our case. And now we actually started from 2018, we have been developing the centralized data exchange platform, and we brought the same one-stop shop to the non-stop shop format. So now we keep the same format. We are not having the public information systems. All ministers, they own the information systems, their data sets. We only created electronic information exchange platform where, as Sandra mentioned, with a once only approach, we are exchanging data between different ministries. So far, we have integrated 50 ministries in the last 1 year and 10 in the process. And we have exchanged over 150 million transactions of the data. So we created 1,500 unique personal data points, including objects and cars and everything, because this is a vital point. The data is a kind of blood of these exchange platforms and public services. And this is our bridge model. In Estonia, it's X-Road, it's called X-Road. And now we have all these ministries all together. We created Asan Login, which is a special single sign-on platform where it creates like opportunity and to have one single username and a password to get access to 20 different portals. But at the beginning, people were facing like problems with memorizing different usernames and passwords, entering to different websites. And in our Asan Login, we have mobile signature, e-signature, we have face recognition-based, AI-based identification system. And recently, we also launched application-based, smart application-based face recognition identification system. And at the moment, there are 41 number of organizations, 81 number of integrated systems, and 2.5 million people are using this system. So basically, if we count that we have potentially digital users between 18 and 45 age groups, we already covered like 50% of those people, but still there is a big way to go with digital literacy to train people, to keep them aligned with changes. As Sandra mentioned, that proactive government is actually a key approach in the world. Therefore, we also have proactive approach. We are not waiting people applying for public services. We are analyzing data and giving them notifications that what kind of eligibilities and privileges they have to apply for the government. If they have, for example, baby born, they can actually get notification that you can name this child. If their ID card is going to expire, they get notification. Even according to GDPR, we are not a part of the GDPR law and the legislation power. Still, we keep this benchmark. We share some notifications with people. Since we share some data with the consent of the person with the bank, they get notification if the bank use the data. If they see something suspicious, they can actually appeal and go to the court. And very soon we are going to launch OpenID platform, where people will be able digitally give consent to any kind of information system that what kind of data they can actually exchange. This is some photos from the application of MyGov application. Before COVID, we had 47,000 users, but now we have 1 million users. COVID actually helped kind of encourage. It was a good incentive. All ministries, they came together to work closely. And we created e-visa system to the country. We also work with, provide services for expat as well. And so far, through that system, it's one of the fastest visa system in the world. We issue in 30 seconds visa upon arrival at the airport. And once you get on the plane, you can apply e-visa to Azerbaijan. And once you arrive in Azerbaijan, your online visa will be ready. And you don't need actually to bring any sticker, etc. You just need to keep your passport number in your hand, and that's enough for entering Azerbaijan. And we apply machine learning and sentiment analysis to understand what kind of feedbacks tourists give us. And based on that, we develop our systems. That's some feedbacks from the future. During COVID pandemics, actually, since we had a data exchange platform, it helped us in a couple of days to create a messaging system in Azerbaijan where people sent message with their ID number in order to get the permission to leave their house to go out. In 40 days lockdown period, we had received 224 million messages and sent and received. And we created a special platform for employers to register their employees in the system, around 1.3 million employees. So this is some statistics. And checkup also worked very well in restaurants, malls, and everywhere in order to check the COVID passports where people, they have vaccination or not. And very soon we are going to extend appeal program, see-click fix. People see the problem in the city, they take the photo, send to the system, and system defines which organization are dealing with this problem. And the organizations resolve the problem and share the result, and the people actually give the feedback. So, and I have put some slides in my presentations.
Thanks,
I want to keep in time. I will share it with you, and you can actually get acquainted with that. And if you have any question, you can send us mail.
Brilliant. Faris, thank you. There's obviously so much more you could say there, and hopefully we will cover some of that in the conversation in a moment. But just to say, as you said there, we will make sure we send your entire slide pack to everybody that's attended today and everybody that's registered for the webinar. So thank you so much. I think really interesting there that you've picked up on similar themes as well to Sandra. So lots of obviously common challenges, I think, and common opportunities. So both mentioned the kind of concept of the one-stop shop, but interesting to see your journey from those physical locations to what you call now the non-stop shop, and also stressing, as Sandra did as well, the proactive approach that government's now taking to make things easier for the citizen, so that they get notified of things that they can do, things that are owed to them. And also what you mentioned there, two things: the importance of inclusion and addressing the risk of the digital divide. And then very much in the pandemic, I think, is the legacy of the pandemic that people saw innovation and data use in a different way, and therefore maybe their trust in government in doing some of this stuff has increased during the pandemic. Thank you so much, Faris. Brilliant second presentation. Alina, I'm coming over to you now.
Good afternoon. It is a pleasure to join today's webinar and to participate in such an exceptional panel of world-class digital leaders. I wish I was also based out of sunny Estonia. Unfortunately, it's still miserably cold in London. But I did have the pleasure of joining the 3Cs Summit, which took place last week in Riga, Latvia. So I did enjoy some of the sun there. But I also got the opportunity to meet with the Estonian delegation, the Baltic states, and the other delegations from the wider region. And it was clear that there's a massive focus right now on digital infrastructure, creating networks, sharing data beyond borders. But one of the key points that came out from all of those discussions was the importance of skill development. Without having the adequate skills present in the citizens, in the national workforce, and in government, these data projects are going to fail. They're not going to take off. They're not going to win support with the wider public. And so maybe just to take a step back, and to contextualize the theme that we're discussing today, it's important to look at the past few years when the most dramatic changes to data policy have taken place. The coronavirus pandemic fundamentally shifted our lives in more ways than we can possibly explore in this call. But most crucially, it transformed what people demand from their governments. Speed and accuracy of government decision-making was put in the spotlight during the pandemic. The better a government could handle an unprecedented escalating number of issues using data, including inflation, global supply chain challenges, vaccination rollout, the more likely they were to win public support and trust, without which data sharing policies cannot take off. And so what was really interesting just before preparing for this webinar today, I was looking at the different countries across Europe which have the most trust in their government when it comes to data. And unfortunately, as I sort of expected, 68% of British people distrust public authorities in terms of their ability to securely oversee their data. And of course, some of the highest ranking countries include, of course, Estonia as well. And so what that really does show us today is that going beyond the technical skills that digital governments have to acquire in order to be able to successfully implement digital projects, there's also a need to develop certain soft skills around being able to communicate effectively between different ministries and departments, but also be able to communicate effectively and build trust with the public. And so advances in digital technologies in recent years have created a wealth of opportunity for policymakers. There's more and more data available. The quality of that data is better, but the skills that underpin all of that work have yet to keep up with that pace of change. And so the crucial role of data is obvious both in the public sector and in the private sector. And so coming from a company, coming from Coursera, we use data in a very special way to be able to capture skill development across various countries, regions, and industries. So in Estonia, we have about 4% of the entire population learning on our platform today. In Azerbaijan, we have 1% of the entire population also acquiring digital skills. But what that gives us the opportunity to do is to understand which countries are performing best in specific skills and which countries are lagging behind. And so what's interesting to see is the correlation. So the countries that on our platform perform the best in AI, in storytelling, in communication, are also those countries which tend to see the largest amount of foreign direct investment, a higher take of public trust in data projects. Those countries also see massive data projects, larger number of startups, and the list kind of goes on from there. So one of the things that I think we'll discuss, I guess, later on in the conversation is the misconception that the public often mistrusts government just simply because data is this really scary thing that no one understands. I think there is an opportunity for governments to bring citizens in to any data projects that they have and be able to do so really effectively, as long as the skills are there across the government that enable policymakers to analyze, understand data, work cross-functionally, and also be able to effectively include citizens into those decisions and into those discussions. So I'll leave it there, but thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to the questions that will follow.
Thanks so much, Alina. And we didn't set that up, I promise. So interesting to hear what you said about how you are training in Estonia and Azerbaijan, how active you are already in those countries.
Right.
I think what you stressed really interesting there, the importance of skills development. Our audience will be primarily kind of policymakers and civil servants. So interesting, the need for kind of skills development there, but also in the citizen as well. And some of those softer skills, so not just around technology, but how do you consult and how do you communicate the importance of all of this as well. And what you said, they're really important at the end about opportunities for government to bring citizens in on new projects to kind of break down some of the myths and the fears around kind of data issues there. So thanks so much, Alina, really, really interesting. Before I head over to Seth, just to say, if you did join late, you can listen to this webinar on Spanish. Please click on the interpretation, you can do that. But also please get your questions coming in, because after we've heard from Seth, we'll have a little bit of a conversation and then we'll turn to questions from the audience. So just use your Q&A function at any point to do that. But last, as I said, but by no means least, over to you, Seth.
Thanks a lot. So currently I'm working at Interoperable Europe, which aims to facilitate, I would say, the single market of data across EU member states. So within our service, we develop semantic specifications, tools and methods, which aim to catalyze, I would say, how we can get silos of data from databases and from, I would say, locally defined XML specs to a kind of common comprehensible standard and formats. Well, it's not easy, as several of my colleagues have already pointed out. It's a very long, slow process, but I think, of course, COVID has helped us at least to make a big step forward. But perhaps just to give a very concrete example of what we're doing, some of you might have heard of the so-called core vocabularies. So the core vocabularies are minimal semantic building blocks that we provide towards member states, but also, for example, in discussion with colleagues in the US and Australia who are inspired by our work. So we offer for a limited number of, I would say, basic concepts like person, location, business, semantic models. So UML diagrams and then XML, RDF serialization formats, which you can reuse when you develop your own data models. But so these core vocabularies, they give you, I would say, a starting point when you develop your own application. So they define what you can do, but they remain fairly abstract because they're, I would say, application and context independent. But underneath that, we also have then the so-called application profiles, which are then, I would say, data models applied to a peculiar setting or business context. I would say the flagship specification we have is DCAT AP, which in Europe is used as a standard to streamline the, I would say, the transition of data in from data providers to public portals. But we also have an application profile, for example, CPSV AP, which aims to define a public service. So those are just a couple of examples of, I would say, relatively practical things that we're doing. And yeah, thanks indeed for putting in a couple of links. And so as we speak, actually, I think last week, a very large scale encompassing digital transformation project was approved from I would say, an institutional legal perspective. Especially Sandra has, without any doubt, heard about the so-called single digital gateway. So the SDGR, which is the acronym, aims to facilitate the automated processing of administrative evidences across borders. So if I'm Belgian, if I decide to move to France tomorrow and I take my family and our car, today I still have, as a citizen, I bear the burden to take the different administrative evidences, the birth certificate of my son, the technical check of my car, and I need to bring that to a municipality somewhere in France where I'll be living. The whole objective of the single digital gateway is to take away the burden of the citizen and to facilitate or to impose national administrations to actually automatically recognize evidences across borders. This sounds simple, but it's not. Because of course, Estonia is one of the leading examples when we talk about like a birth certificate. Estonia and lots of member states have already for a large number of years a completely data-driven approach to these evidences, whereas we also have other member states where they're still a little bit stuck in a paper-based paradigm where you have, let's say, the digital version would then be a non-structured PDF. So with the single digital gateway, we need to come up with a solution which both allows, I would say, the front runners as Estonia to, of course, to go to proceed with the data-driven approach to evidences, but we also need to bring in the group of member states who still somehow are managing non-structured evidences. So this was just an example of a very concrete project. And actually, I'm really hoping that people from other continents, other countries, could perhaps also share some ideas and thoughts about how they are standardizing administrative evidences to facilitate these types of, or better services towards the citizen at the end of the day. So thank you, and looking forward to the discussion.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Seth. We have, as you said, sent to the audience links to the two of the projects that you mentioned there, and we'll resend all of those to everybody who registered as well, so they've all got that in their inboxes afterwards. But again, some of those key themes that I think have come out from everything that you've said is, if you can do this effectively, if you can share data in different ways, more effective ways, how much simpler it makes things for the citizen, removing some of those burdens for the citizen. But I imagine on top of that, it also reduces kind of errors and reduces fraud for the administrators as well. So it's kind of a win-win all round as well, I think. And both to say as well, there was a plea from Sandra at the beginning and from Seth to get in touch with them if people had ideas and kind of initiatives that they wanted to share. So we'll make sure we share your contact details with the audience as well, so that they can get in touch with all of you afterwards. So thank you so much. We've had a couple of questions in. I think one was directly for you, Alina, so I think you've maybe answered that one, or you might want to, I might pick up on that one in a moment. But just from me, I want to come back initially on those great presentations that you mentioned there. And one thing that struck me is that you've all kind of talked about the need to kind of break down silos, and talked about the need, Alina touched on this, that it's cultural change as much as kind of technological change as well. But the reality for a lot of civil servants that will be watching this is they will be sitting on old systems, kind of historic systems that need updating and modernizing. And when resources are really tight, do you think senior leaders in the civil service are giving this issue the priority it deserves, both in terms of their focus, on it, but also investment in kind of updating some of these systems? Sandra, you're nodding there. I'm going to come back to you. We haven't heard from you for a while.
Should I jump in?
Yeah, that would be great.
Oh, yes. Oh, this is such a topic close to my heart because, you know, if I mentioned earlier that we started with our first e-government systems end of 1990s, early 2000s, then we have a lot of legacy systems right now. And this is a huge issue because let's say those who started later or are starting now with some of those services, they're not going to face the issues that we do face right now. And this is going to be troublesome because it's expensive. We literally had, and don't tweet this, please. We literally had a case a couple of years ago where one of our data servers caught fire because it was so old and dusty. And I mean, luckily nothing happened and we duplicate our data. So, I mean, everything was fine. And it was like a agriculture, some type of database. So nothing too important in terms of not critical data, but still, and this legacy is a huge issue. And, you know, Estonia is a small country. Our state budget is roughly 10-11 billion euros annually. It's very, very small. And we've traditionally spent only just over 1% of the state budget on reviving IT infrastructure. And this is everything from security systems to police, to school systems, to whatnot. So everything in public sector. And this is not a lot, but I mean, luckily we're getting to more and more to higher numbers. And even though in Estonia, I mean, you probably know if you follow politics, we had this far right coalition one coalition ago, but everyone realizes the importance of IT. And even though, I mean, there might be, let's say, priorities elsewhere, but there's always the priority of IT. Everyone, each and every political party of Estonia understands this, but there could always be more money. But we're so thankful to also the European funds such as RRF and so forth, which have helped us come through the times of COVID as well. But legacy, this is a difficult problem.
Thanks, Sandra. Faris, I mean, obviously you're putting a lot of focus on the IT, but do you think it's getting sufficient investment? And do you think leaders at the very top of the civil service understand how important this issue is?
To be honest, like leadership in digitization is the key point. It's the must. Therefore, in all our inauguration of One Stop Shop, President attends himself and he shows his like will in terms of simplification, fighting with corruption and openness and accountability and transparency. And at the same time, we came up with an idea that mainly not to get dependable on the government budget, state budget. We have created such business model. We are working closely with private sector where public-private partnership, they actually develop the systems. And based on that, we make a depository into intergovernmental like use, and we generate some service fee. And based on that, the private sector actually cover their cost, and we also get some benefit and for the future. Like e-visa system, we did in that way. E-procurement system in the country, we did in that way. So basically, all users they pay some service fee, and using that amount of money, actually we finance our project. And even we, according to our calculation, we saved around 100 million, like it's 80 million USD to our budget, to Azerbaijani government budget. And now we open the data platform, like non-private data sets to the startups, where they will also come up with an ideas, and we will work with a public-private partnership. At the same time, we create some depository systems like e-procurement, ERP system, human resources management, task system, where all organizations, government organizations, they have the same problems, that they might have the same solutions based on cloud-based soft services. So once we provide all of them, so we get directly from the budget per subscription based, and each ministry, they don't spend millions of dollars on developing the same programs and like with silos. So they are using the same platform as a cloud. This is our solution, how we actually bypass extra investments on government systems.
Thanks, Ferry. So some innovative ways there of kind of funding some of the modernization. Seth, there's a question that's come in for you, which is related to this. I think this one was for you. Could you expand on how you set up your systems to manage integration and data sharing between different departments versus respect for the privacy and security of people's information? So this is everything we're talking about, really, is how do you kind of link up these data sets while still keeping those concerns around privacy and security as well. So Seth, I'm going to put that to you, but I will come back to everyone on this as well.
Yeah, so a great but also challenging question. But so to give a very practical reply, so I think at some point there was a link shared to this GitHub repository with the so-called Single Digital Gateway Sandbox. So actually, together with data modelers and business experts from across EU member states, we have organized multiple webinars on, for example, so we gathered, let's say, the 30 or the 40 experts on what is a birth certificate. And we asked specific examples from Spain, from Germany, from France. Please send us what are the metadata fields that you use. And like honestly, a birth certificate, it seems pretty straightforward, but across Europe, we're a diverse, I would say, continent. People sometimes think differently about certain things. Just think about gender. Voilà, as a society, we're, I would say, we think now differently about gender than 10 or 15 years ago. So, and it's really important to take into account, I would say, European diversity and values. But so to come back to the question, for a specific data model, we gather the experts and we try to go to a consensus to identify the minimum metadata fields which identify a specific administrative evidence. But of course, indeed, a very big challenge was privacy, and because there was a very long debate on where exactly the evidences should be stored on the, I would say, the data provider or the data requester side. But anyone who's really who has specific questions on that, I'm happy to provide more information, because it's a really long, complex discussion.
Sure. Yeah, some of this stuff gets very technical very quickly, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Alina, I'm coming to you. I want to ask you about this issue of kind of whether enough priority is being given to this. Just from your experience of working with different governments and different organizations, do you think kind of that leaders are giving enough focus and attention on these issues? And also, I just want to ask you to answer Phil's question as well about if you know what percentage of UK citizens you're upskilling Coursera at the moment.
Sure, absolutely. So I really appreciate the question from Phil. So the number of learners that we have currently in the UK almost reaches 3 million. But actually what is quite interesting with the UK specifically is that we have 7 million, almost 8 million course enrollments. So typically what we're seeing is that learners come to our platform and they're actually taking more than just the one course. But something that I didn't mention before when I mentioned the skill development that we're tracking across every country, the way that we're able to do that is through the tests that we do on our platform. So every time someone comes and tries to acquire a new skill, whether that's in data analysis or data visualization, they have to show that they've understood their content and they're able to apply some of those skills practically in a lab environment. And so given the way that learners respond to these tests and assignments and how well they're performing in them, we're able to say, okay, learners from this country are actually performing really well in data analytics. And so their skills are more advanced, but they're really struggling when it comes to skills within business. And so that's generally the area where they're struggling behind. In the UK specifically, the workforce is doing pretty well when it comes to business skills, finance, soft skills. Unfortunately, when it comes to AI, machine learning, 4IR and emerging technologies, the UK is, according to our own data, lagging behind in comparison to digital-first governments elsewhere across Europe. And then to answer your question regarding where we see governments prioritizing and how they're approaching these challenges, I think what often sets different governments apart is the ability to be a little bit more humble and say, we are unable to launch some of these projects because we simply do not have the skills within the government to be able to implement some of these projects. And of course, we know that the private sector has data scientist roles available, which pay quite highly. And so often what happens with the public sector is that you're trying to attract that same type of talent with wages that don't match. And so what we're trying to do, and the way that we're working with governments right now, is we're taking individuals who have worked in the civil service for maybe more than 5 years. They're really experienced when it comes to health, economy, manufacturing, whatever it may be, and providing them the skills they need in data so that they can become data analysts or data policymakers within those specific departments. So I think the way that we've seen this approached most successfully is just taking a step back, analyzing what skills do we need for the projects we're about to launch, and then how do we take our existing workforce and acquire and develop those skills they need.
Thanks, Alina. I want to come back to the issue. I think it was raised in one of the questions, and we had a question in advance around security. So privacy is one issue of data, but security of the data is another issue. And we do quite a few webinars on cyber kind of issues and cyber security issues at the moment. So I want to ask all of you whether, as governments start to share more data across different departments and maybe across the private and the public sector, to what extent are kind of cyber issues, so potential for more cyber attacks, an issue, and how should civil servants be addressing those and mitigating those potential risks? I'm going to shake up the order a little bit. So Faris, I'm coming to you first on this. Is this a big issue for you as governments proceed along their digitalization journey?
Actually, there is a nice statement that the safest place for the ship is a port, but the ship is not created for staying at the port, so it should sail for a while. And therefore, if we go for digitization, of course, there will be some cybersecurity issues and challenges, but how we can overcome all these problems. The first one, we chose not to have a centralized data exchange data system, like the data is all together in one place. Therefore, we chose a hybrid one. All government agencies, they have the information systems, but once it comes to sharing data, they use our data exchange platform. At the same time, the digital literacy, actually teaching and training people is also important. Not only citizens as users, but at the same time, employees. With one of the Estonian private company, now we are going to launch a cyber hygiene platform where we are teaching and training Azerbaijani civil servants and plus citizens that how they have to be careful about their personal data. But because at the moment, when you pay attention that citizens, they don't care about their own data while they share it on Facebook or as a social network. Actually, they did share all about information. I call Facebook as a global government. So one day they will issue visa, passport, ID cards, because they know everything exactly about human being. At the same time, like for making sure that you have firewalls, you have hardwares, you have clear standards that to what extent a civil servant they have access to data sets, and there must be some recordings, there must be some notification systems, and some data sets actually they must be kind of silos to some extent, that there is no internet connection. There must be government internet within the government agencies sharing these exchanging data. Data must be hashed and encrypted while they are sent. So blockchain might be applied when any changes happen to the data. I mean, there are a lot of precautions must be taken into consideration when it comes to cyber, and the process management is vital. And plus, you know, when it comes to private sector, I do know that maybe 80% of the projects, they might fail, like digital or undigital. But when it comes to government, all citizens' perception is there must be no failure in government. But we are also like human, we also can make mistakes. And if you consider government and the private sector, in private sector, they're more educated people because they get more salaries. But on the other hand, in the private sector, we can only attract those people that they come with lower salary, you know. At the same time, we have to keep them trained and, you know, coming across. When it comes to Alina's approach, you know, yes, government agencies, why they don't share sometimes unsuccessful projects, because citizens' perception and their feedback about them will be not, you know, good and positive. That's why it might be a kind of reason why they don't share it, the wisdom that they have. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, Faris, you've raised lots of issues there about kind of the challenge for public sector to recruit and retain really good professionals in this space as well when it comes to kind of those pay issues. Sandra, you were nodding along there on the cyber issues. Do you have a big focus on cyber hygiene as well, I imagine, in Estonia?
Yeah, no, definitely. I just want to agree. And I mean, because we've seen it's finally the people who not failed, but it's the people who let through the incidents. I mean, we started talking about cybersecurity as soon as we built our first information systems, and at first no one was listening to us. And then Estonia was the first country in the world against whom there was a nationwide cyber attack launched back in 2007. And then we were started being taken seriously because people realized, okay, probably they knew what they were talking about. And now we have the NATO Cybersecurity Center of Excellence based in Tallinn. But definitely, I mean, there's a lot of systems and let's say safety nets you can put in place internally, such as over the X road. All of the transactions are time-stamped. We do use a blockchain, as was mentioned by Faris earlier, that you can use this, right? We do use that, but exactly as you said, Faris, you're now training people to have cyber hygiene. Because I mean, you can go to Estonia's Cybersecurity Agency website, you can see how many cyber incidents we have overnight. And I just checked, last data is from 21st of June, then we had 34 malware incidents. And of course, these are all of the incidents where people open up links that they shouldn't. You know, we have these massive Facebook campaigns of these malware and stuff like this. So most of the incidents are still man-made. The systems don't fail us as much as people do.
Interesting. Systems don't fail as much as people do. Alina, are you seeing a big increase in people wanting cybersecurity training as departments look to kind of share data more?
Yes, there's been a huge increase in cybersecurity and a focus on building those skills. Similar, I think, to data and AI generally, cybersecurity is now being taught or provided to civil servants of all rankings. It's not important if you're the most senior policymaker or if you're someone just working on a very small project or data piece. You have to have some knowledge and awareness of cybersecurity in order to be able to do your job well. I think one of the downfalls usually when it comes to compliance with security is on the humans more than on the technical systems themselves. And so it's about making sure that the human talent within civil services, within governments, understand the the importance of their role, even if it's just sending email communication or publishing a few things here and there. The ramifications of their work can actually be quite large. And for that reason, I see governments now opting for government-wide training around cybersecurity. So yes, there has been a huge increase in that specifically that we've seen.
Thanks, Alina. Seth, I'm coming to you on this issue then of kind of cyber security. This must be a huge consideration as you're working across so many member states.
Yeah, absolutely. I can only kind of point back to the stories or the anecdotes. They're not really anecdotes because they're so endemic, what Sandra mentioned in regards to about the human still being kind of the weakest link in the chain. I'd say I'm really not an expert on security, but yeah, I think it's a fundamental issue that we're still kind of trying to come to terms with, and well, I think also, for me, the key points were raised by my colleagues, so I don't think I have anything.
Sure.
Extra
Well, I'm going to come to you first on the next one, Seth, so that it's easy.
Okay.
But I just want to mention before I come, and I'm conscious that we are nearly at the end of our time. So I just want to mention that we've put a link in the chat to everyone. It's a report that Coursera have done on a global skills report, which kind of covers what are the world's most in-demand skills at the moment. So that makes for quite interesting reading. But yeah, this just, we are nearly at the end of our time, but Seth, I'm going to come to you first on this question. And it's around this issue of kind of trust and the importance of trust between different countries, but also between the citizen and their governments when it comes to sharing of data. And I just want to ask, because I think there is a divide between countries where you have a digital ID scheme in place and countries where you don't. And you must come across this, I imagine, working across kind of Europe, because some countries do have that digital ID scheme in place and some don't. One, does it make it easier just to share data in general if you have a kind of unique digital ID scheme in place? And secondly, I imagine there are bigger issues around trust where you don't have already that kind of digital ID for the citizen in place. So I'm coming to all of you on your thoughts of this, because from the webinars we've done, I think countries are starting to go in two different directions here, those that do and those that don't.
Yeah.
So your thoughts on this?
But actually, in my experience, one of the biggest hurdles that we're trying to take in regards to trust are actually the administrations who are, again, based on kind of the endless meetings that we had, very often, and also people refer to this, local administrations or national administrations sometimes are really afraid of losing autonomy. So when you talk about interoperability, streamlining data, there is also sometimes a lack of trust on, let's say, within a member state or within a local, regional, or national administration. Of like, oh dear, if we want to go towards this, we will completely need to revamp our legacy systems. We don't have the manpower, we don't have the resources. So actually, yeah, for me, the issue of trust, or at least in kind of the conversations and the dialogues I have been having, was an important one on that level. And again, also a way to get actually more trust, both from, I would say, administrations, but also, I would say, businesses, is trying to build clearer bridges between the domain or the business experts and the data modelers. At the end of the day, people need to understand how the reality they're dealing with, how that is transposed in the digital realm, and that there are no glitches, no inconsistencies, that the data quality is acceptable. So for me, those are perhaps two other concerns that that are on my radar.
So the trust issues in the work you do are more around whether the standards of the data and the systems in which they're kind of being moved across are of the same kind of high levels.
Yeah.
Those different borders. Yeah.
Yeah.
Slightly.
But again, I might be over-reading this from my semantic interoperability angle. So I'm sure that other colleagues have
No, absolutely. Well, Alina, I'm coming to you on this. Do you, because obviously you operate in different countries, do you see a distinction between countries that have kind of digital IDs in place and those that don't, when it comes to, in particular, the trust issues?
In particular with trust issues across the different countries, I'd say that there is a sort of digital divide between the way the country rolls out that scheme and the information available to them. So I think going back to maybe Estonia again, one of the projects or the initiative around proactive life event services, it's being communicated very clearly to the public, what's happening, how it's happening, how is that data being used and why. And I think in a similar sense with digital IDs, when that scheme is rolled out, if it's clearly communicated and you have a society that really understands the technology behind it, then the project kind of lifts off and everyone's pretty happy with it. But if it's being thrown at a population that I guess, generally speaking, doesn't really understand the information and doesn't have that much information available to them, those projects really highlight the digital divide as well. So it really does depend country by country. And I'd say, generally speaking, countries which have citizens that are very aware of the projects and understand the technology being used, those countries are doing or performing better with those initiatives.
And as other people have said, I think the pandemic maybe has increased people's kind of trust and kind of openness to embracing some of this. But I'm going to come to Ferris first and then Sandra on this issue of trust and maybe whether, I think you both have digital ID systems in place, if I'm correct. So has that helped in terms of kind of developing trust with the citizen? Ferris, I'm going to come to you first.
Definitely, I think this is a must if you want to have proactive public services. The digital ID is a must, like pinification and unification of information system. If we want like information system talk to each other, so we need to first unify the data, like to link it to the person in different information systems. That once they call this data, it actually exchanges to the data exchange platform. In Azerbaijan, we have e-signature, we have mobile signature, we have face recognition based video recording system for identification, and we have a new one which is smart mobile based face recognition system that actually we also identify the person. Actually, we started from that, like the first creating the data catalog, data sets, and afterward to unify them, to link them with the personal identification number or car, vehicle, band number, etc., etc. Like for each object, you have different unification. Tax payment, you have tax payment number. And once you are actually linked them, then it's easy to call information once only approach works in that way. Otherwise, you cannot call. I was in London last week. We were meeting with GDS, Government Digital Service. So it's actually a big challenge in front of UK government in terms of digital ID, because without digital ID, you cannot create a personal account for each citizen where they can actually see their data, see the information, and apply it for public services. In Singapore, in South Korea, in Estonia, in Azerbaijan, and in some other countries, since they have digital ID, it's easy for them to create a proactive government.
Thanks, Ferris. It's interesting. We've just had a comment in which I think sums up this particular debate quite nicely. So Manuel has asked, are we closer to bringing the administration closer to the citizen or closer to Orwell's 1984? So I think that kind of sums up maybe the kind of different kind of perceptions of this from the citizen. So Sandra, I started with you. I'm going to come to you last on this issue of citizens' trust and to what extent having a digital unique identifier is important.
Yeah, so from the very beginning, we've operated with this idea that citizens own their own data, and the government merely has access when they have the right to access, such as a medical professional, a doctor can access personal medical data. However, no other government official can do that. Only the policeman can see my police records. So for instance, when I was speeding a few years ago and I got caught and then I got a fine, then the policeman was checking my data because we use this ID card. I don't even need to carry my driver's license with me. I was in the police car and I saw they just inserted my ID code and they saw only my identity documents, documents related to my car, insurance, and whether I had had any fines before, nothing else. And later on, and this is what we've established, and this is what I'm taking forward right now, is something called the data tracker. So people can go and see who has accessed their data. So that day I went and saw that the police had accessed my data. And if that day I would not have been driving, if I would have walked to the office, for instance, and a police officer would have checked my data, I could have challenged this. And people have been fined, people's licenses have been taken away. And this is how people realize, okay, I am the owner of my own data. Yes, if there's a need base, then other people can access this, but this is not by default. And if you put these safeguards in place, and if you let people know of those safeguards, then they actually gradually gain more and more trust. And this is what we are operating with. And this is what we want to take forward as well. The citizens are the owners of their own data.
Thanks, Sandra. I think it's really interesting because I think in some countries, like, for example, in the UK, Alina might back this up, because we've had such a big debate on kind of ID cards. The issue of kind of ID cards gets mixed up with the issue of digital ID. So it all becomes a very difficult conversation to have. I just want to say to the audience that you might have received a questionnaire in your inboxes. If you don't mind, if you could answer that after the webinar, it'll only take you a few seconds. It just means we can make sure we give you exactly the type of webinars that are useful for you going forward. We have had the final question. We had a question coming in Spanish. I'm sorry, I won't attempt to read that out in Spanish, but I'm going to read the translation in English, and I'm sure our translators will put it back into Spanish. And that is, there may be types of digital trust. For political interactions, for identification, I think it's total trust. For financial, total. But there are other parts where we might not like to be identified. What do you think about that? So I think that's similar to the question that we've just had, which is, yeah, maybe a citizen wants to give some, but not all of their kind of information to the government. So I imagine that can be dealt with in terms of consent issues. Is that right? Does anybody want to come in on that one?
I could just very quickly come in, and then I'll let someone else talk. And I think in some way we've passed this train that we don't want to be identified anymore, right? Of course, there are some things you can do anonymously, but there is no being anonymous anymore in this world. However, then we can control the data that it doesn't violate people's fundamental rights, such as now with the AI Act in Europe. We're banning most likely public places and the facial recognition authentication tools, identification tools. And this is a good example, because in the US, during the Black Lives Matters, when there were mass protests, then actually public authorities were using AI to detect people in those crowds. And this is not something that should happen. So I think as long as, yes, there is trust towards the politicians, this is of course easier, but we have to build these safeguards around the new technologies that we use that make this identification when it's not wanted easier. And then we really have to regulate those. So here regulation comes definitely stronger into play.
Yeah, interesting. We haven't mentioned regulation today, but that's a big issue when it comes to kind of data sharing. Do anybody, Ferry, Seth or Alina, any final thoughts on this privacy issue around data? Yes, Faris.
Actually, I'm the member of the Committee on AI in the Council of Europe. It's been like in the process in 2019, how to control AI. So the ethics of AI. So once the identification system and all kind of such kind of platforms, there must be clear explanation that how those algorithms are working. Are there any polarization or gender inequality, etc., etc.? It must be open and transparent, that everyone should understand that how these algorithms works and how they actually identify the person. Do they put people in a group, or like is there any kind of individual approach or not? Because somehow we are individuals, and those programmers and developers, they are writing codes, they might be somehow like stereotype, might have some stereotypes. So basically it also affects how they write the codes. Yeah. But in general, yes, people might choose the way how they are not identified. Therefore, the government should offer different solutions, like one-stop shop, physical place, people come and apply, they don't go digital, they don't want to use it, it's okay, because it's constitutional right. Every citizen has a right to get ID card. Government cannot give only one option, that I have only digital platform that you have to use it, otherwise you cannot get ID card. So there must be in place in some physical place as well.
So back to what you said, in addition to that transparency, having options for the citizen, really important.
Yes.
Steph, I saw you on. Did you want to come in for 1 second before we close?
Yeah, very quickly, for those who haven't heard about the Solid project, which is, I would say, the brainchild of Tim Berners-Lee, who developed the web. we now have with Finland and the Netherlands and Flanders a couple of early experiments. So it turns the whole paradigm of personal data on the web upside down. And Flanders has invested now, I think, about 20 or 25 million euros on this project. So it was long time considered as a kind of a Robin Hood type of kind of utopic thinking, but it's actually being implemented now as we speak in a couple of governments. So for those of you who haven't heard about the Solid project, I don't have time to develop it, but basically you give citizens a virtual USB key, or you keep the rights and your data on your side. So for those who are interested, you can explore it. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think these issues are only going to get more and more kind of prioritized, I think, as we go forward. Well, I can't believe how quickly that time has gone. We are now out of time. Thanks to the audience for sending in the questions. As you will see, we've put up details of one of our future webinars coming up. If you enjoyed today and you want to sign up for another one already, on the 5th of July, we will be talking about how fintech can help women's financial inclusion. So really interesting topic there, and there's lots of other information about our webinars on the Global Government Forum website as well. But thank you so much today to our fantastic panel for sharing your time and your expertise with us, to Sandra, to Faris, to Alina, and to Seth. Thank you so much. I think really, really interesting and very useful conversation for our audience, with lots of practical information for them to take away. To the audience, we will be sending you a link with today's video, so you can watch it all again, or you can share it with your colleagues. And also we will be sending you a link to an article that has all of the key points that were mentioned today in today's conversation. That will be coming out in a couple of weeks. And thank you again to Coursera for being our wonderful knowledge partner today. I hope you've enjoyed.
Thank you. Thank you very much for great moderation. It was fantastic to have you, all of you. It was fantastic, to have all these panelists. Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Lovely if you have us with you. See you guys. Enjoy the rest of the day wherever you are, and see you at another one of our webinars.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye.